Hi, this is Sonia Bhartia, and welcome to another episode of TFiR Insights. If you look at the current crisis that we are going through, I think AI is going to play a very critical role in the post COVID 19 world because companies have already seen how they can remain operational and functional while their offices are all empty. People are working from home. And that's when, AI is playing a lot of critical roles. If you look at Microsoft, I think if I'm not wrong, last week they actually that's a kind of not good story for journalists that they decided to remove all their journalists from MSN and move to AI. Uh, Sometime when we look at these new technologies and they take away some jobs, the fact is they also create a lot of jobs. A good example is Wheel. It did take away the jobs of four people who used to carry luggage on their back, but it created new industry. Airlines, Uber, Lyft, and Tesla. So yes, new technologies will take job aways, but they will also create many more jobs that we never thought about. So to discuss the role of AI in the modern economics and the post-COVID world, today we have with us Ahmer Inam, Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer at Pactera Edge. Ahmer, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell me how much of that I said do you agree with? The fact is, I'm also a science fiction writer, so I do think a bit ahead of what you are going through. But what do you think that the role AI is going to play in this world? I also want to talk about sometimes people do fear that AI is going to take a lot of jobs away. So there are a lot of things to talk about. Let's first start with how much do you agree with the statement that I made there?
I do agree with you to a large extent. And I think one of the things that we should talk about with AI is, of course, is creating new economies and new ways of working and it's optimizing. But there's definitely a fear that exists out there that should be acknowledged about job replacement. And there's actually a social aspect to it, right? That the economies would have to and the governments will have to address. And in fact, many technologies, including Bill Gates, are talking very openly about this particular phenomenon of the job replacement going from the blue collar to white collar. So yes, that is definitely a concern. As in AI, where it is right now, as far as its innovation is concerned, we are not truly there where it can replace humans. And if anybody is talking about that we are there today to replace humans and human thinking, they're not truly understood of the state of AI as it is today. So the aspect of the AI that we stand for, and actually, and in fact, Microsoft also talks about, which is responsible AI. Our perspective is mindful AI, which is augmentation of human potential, which is where AI does the best. So it's not just a replacement, but it's an augmentation. A case in point would be, as you mentioned, some of the job families and functions you talked about. But if I honing into, for example, retail or consumer packaged goods, so where you have people who are doing significant amount of demand planning, right? So assessing and forecasting demand for products. Traditionally, that work has been done by essentially like an army of people, right? And a lot of the people were just not able to utilize their experience and expertise to be able to drive the level of efficiency and forecasting of the demand that they could based on their experiences because they're just drowning in data. So with AI, we can help synthesize. We can bring the amount of complexity in the data and the rigor that human mind cannot comprehend, and then provide augmented insights that are driven by AI that then a human in the loop can utilize that as a way to inform a decision that is going to be a much more informed decision than an individual might be able to make. So augmentation is where we are right now. And then this is also where a lot of battles for adoption of AI are also being fought because there is definitely a pushback from the enterprises in terms of being able to adopt it. But post COVID-19, the world has changed. The way of working have changed. It's more remote, more technologically and technically connected world that we are in. And as we are seeing with remote working capabilities and capacities and technology that are coming in behind the scene, a lot of them are AI enabled in terms of even things that we don't see. For example, even the fun example of utilizing these creative backgrounds, right, in your Zoom calls, a lot of that, like, how is that being created? It's not like replacing people, but it's adding some joy to our work environment. The space where it's going to be very, very, very critical is healthcare, especially with the current environment of COVID and post COVID-19. with the data that is being collected in understanding the virus, its behavior, and then informing the vaccine research. I think that's where it's going to be extremely crucial.
As you said, a lot of work going on, especially in the healthcare. Let's just stick to the healthcare industry. We do know that even if you look at cancerous cells, how precise you can have imaging or scanning that will help in identifying which are cancerous cells or not. So company like NCP or all those, Philips, they're working on improving that. But at the same time, you also need algorithms or machine learning tools or AI to actually figure it out what's going on. So what I want to understand is that what kind of work is going on that kind of complements the work we have already done, plus what medical science has achieved today, where AI is coming in and they say, hey, you know what, you can do only so much. This is what we'll let you do even more.
And as you mentioned, it's a good point. As you mentioned, AI is really good at taking repetitive tasks and then basically optimizing it, right? And the other thing I'll add to that is AI does really well when you have a very specific point problem. When you're talking about the generalization of the AI, like it's actually doesn't work that way, and it gets talked about that way quite often, but it doesn't work that way. So identification of a niche specific problem, and in building a solution that can take the repetitive processes and optimize it is some of the best ways to do that. So going into the healthcare as an example, right? So doctors do not have enough time in the day to continuously look at x-rays and imaging that are coming to it. And of course, there's a lot of art and science that goes into an experience. The idea behind AI is that if we can learn from many history of these images and then the diagnosis, right, and it start to train for very specific diseases and the prediction of those, then what we can do is with AI, we can start to provide a more faster way of getting to a diagnosis, limiting and reducing the cases of misdiagnosis that can happen because there's a human element to it, and then allow the doctors or the human expert to look at the information that is synthesized by AI and then be able to drive a conclusion that is going to be explainable and addressable and then acceptable, right? So those are critical elements to it. And it actually optimizes the entire process so that we can get to diagnosis and hence to treatment much faster and quicker than we have been able to.
You touched upon in the beginning mindful AI, ethics, morality, all these things. Also at the same time, like especially in the healthcare industry, I'm giving you a very simple example. Voice, it kind of becomes a very strong medium for interaction. A lot of patients, they cannot use a lot of where you need to have that empathy in the voice when you're talking to somebody who is help you need. So can you talk about, in addition to just because when we look at robots and AI, we just look at something which is really rigid. How do you make it more mindful, and should we really care about that aspect?
It's actually extremely crucial. Driving with empathy is extremely crucial in building AI systems and solutions that are going to impact human life. And it's especially pertinent in healthcare space. And actually, we are doing some work in empathy-led AI and in building solutions for healthcare. Case in point, like some of the things we look at, when we did our research with our doctors and nurses and in some of the work that we have done, we have found that doctors and nurses are actually very frustrated because a large portion of their work is spent in inputting data into EMR systems, so electronic medical record. That data actually goes back into this basically a vacuum of information, and then getting any kind of a synthesis and an information out of it gets very challenging. And because they're spending so much time even putting the data together, what they are finding is that they are not able to even have an interaction, and in fact, even make eye contacts with patients. And making an eye contact with patient and telling them like, you will be okay. It's extremely critical. And we are hearing from the medical practitioners that they are feeling frustrated. They're not able to provide care because so much of their time is spent in just inputting data into AMR. And then on top of it, adding to inefficiency. So we have a step in the process where we have lost connection to the patient. Number two, when all this data gets captured, then it goes into the back end, and then we have multiple folks like nurses and doctors who are spending inordinate amount of time looking into that information and trying to figure out a way to put together a care chart in a way, right? So how they're going to treat the patient. And it requires significant amount of eyeballs and manual work to do that. On top of it, then we also have patients, especially elderly patients who are in home care or hospitals that are facing the problem of loneliness. And loneliness leads to issues around depression. And then we know that the pathway from mental health to physical health is actually very rapid. And then there's enough research that shows that. So adding empathy to the initial stages of the care, the first step of the care journey itself is crucial. So what we are looking into is how do we design systems that are going to augment care from a medical care perspective and allow doctors to create and make that empathy-based relationship so that we can actually change the dynamic from the doctors and nurses being in a way, I mean, the term that one of the doctors said in our research was they feel like they become data monkeys. And then to kind of get them out of that and then be able to provide care. So we are actually bringing in a lot of the research from, so the way we approach that, taking a step back, is understanding and assessing the process itself, like walking the walk, perhaps like a Gemba walk and those types of techniques that we can utilize, and then just observe to see where the things are breaking. Understand the process themselves, because process may not be ready for AI. AI is just not a solution you can just dump in and hope everything will be fixed. So we understand the process end to end first, understand the human aspect of it. We actually talk to a lot of folks, understand the human impact and the aspect of it. And then we start to put together prototypes and prototypes. And the concept that we utilize in that is a minimally lovable product. So lovable product is an aspect which is honed in into mindfulness and empathy. And then we are starting to then bring in elements from research, from algorithms perspective, and then augmenting that so that we can start to introduce the empathy back into the process. So AI is not there from an algorithm perspective yet to where it can mimic empathy, right, in an artificial way. There are definitely some really interesting technologies that are coming online that are interesting, but our approach is utilizing the best of the research that's available, but honing it into the human aspect of how these AI solutions will be used so that we can bring human centricity back into the process.
I'm also curious, what kind of work are you doing, especially for COVID-19? Because if I'm not wrong, there's a Pactera Edge COVID-19 tracker as well. Talk a bit about that work.
Yeah, so we actually, coming out of some of the work that we've been doing with healthcare space, we identified and actually were informed by the healthcare researchers that a key gap for them is understanding the symptoms. The testing is still limited. It's getting better, but still limited. And the data is still fairly US and UK centric, right? So what we have done is looking at the gap that exists in the data that epidemiologists and virologists are facing, we have launched a truly global COVID symptom tracker. It's anonymous. Any individual can go in either through their web or mobile phone and start to basically provide their information about the symptoms that they're facing and what kind of testing they may have gotten, what type of treatment they may have gotten. And the idea is to help researchers understand how the disease this virus is spreading, how it has spread, what type of symptoms it has manifested. And then there's an aspect of hyperlocalization, because if the data that is at with the researchers right now, which is at least on the US side, is primarily US and the UK. But if we don't understand why and then how it manifested in Greece versus Italy, and then within, for example, India in the state of Kerala versus in Maharashtra, in one case very rampant and in other cases not so. We need to understand those nuances at a fairly larger scale, because without that understanding, we won't be able to truly inform the cure, and then also not be able to inform any potential next iterations or next waves. So the aspect of that, as the governments and health authorities are getting prepared for the next waves, potential next waves, they have to be prepared with newer and then different ways of containing. So if you're thinking about the tracking of the tracking, and then also the hyperlocal quarantines to contain hotspots. So we'll have to have that those policies be informed by data. So this is our approach to providing that data as an open source, free to any research community that needs it. This is our way to kind of give back to the community. Yeah, and one thing I also wanted to mention within that in the healthcare is an idea of responsibility and in ethics, and the responsibility of ethics in care along with empathy is critical. And then that comes from understanding and then honing in the others, right? Thinking about the other humans. And then that is a critical element to the work that we are doing with mindful AI in healthcare specifically. And then also utilizing mindful AI as a concept or a philosophy in this approach to open sourcing this platform that we have built so that we can gather this information and make it available to research community.
When you mentioned open source, are you releasing open source technologies from your product, or are you using open source technologies? Can you talk about the engagement that you have there with the open source communities?
So in open source communities, we are definitely participate heavily in that. We utilize, and we are number one, very strong proponent and supporters of open source community. Number two, we leverage open source. Number three, we contribute to open source. Number four, within open source community, when we do have some really interesting technologies that come up, that some of them may eventually even be taken up by their initial like innovators into potential product ideas, or maybe like in a startup. So we have also created an incubator where we are actually giving these startups a platform to incubate their technologies and then take them to the market with us.
Can you talk about some of the core open source technologies and open source projects that you are leveraging or contributing to?
So leveraging, I think within the AI side of the thing, just the amount of the algorithms that are happening and that are coming up in the community, I think we connect really well with a fairly broader community there. And as within open source, newer ways of doing things. So for example, data profiling as an example is a challenge. It's not sexy thing to talk about, but it's a pain, right? And so there are plenty of solutions and tools out there. And just as an example, Uber has recently open source Amundsen, which is one of their data profiling solution that they have built. So we are utilizing that, and we have built some stuff on top of it. And we have also merged together several other open source platforms to put together accelerators that can help fast track data science or machine learning algorithm building process. On the other side, we have also utilized open source technologies to build a platform called OnePharma, which we utilize at a global scale, which is the same platform that we are using to gather the COVID symptoms as well as globally. And this is a platform that some of the world's top technology enterprises are using to gather and then source and then label and annotate AI enablement data. So voice information, video information, text, images, things like that. And then mindfulness comes into that place too, because in many cases, some of the work that we're doing is around how do we make voice-based experiences more accessible to globally at communities that are generally not touched by AI. So when we're looking at voice systems, we are helping some of our clients make their voice systems be more that understand accents better. Initial experiences with voice with Alexa and then Siri, they were not that great, right, as far as understanding accents are concerned, even within English. And also, as these voice systems are becoming more global and then adding more languages to them, so it's language support. So we are also partnering with some of these clients in helping gather information and the data that is going to make voice experiences more accessible at global scale. The third thing is also we are working with Some of our partners in retail and CPG space, for example, and the retail space primarily, that are building these voice systems to in post COVID, because we don't know what the new normal is going to be, right? So social distancing and things like that may become a norm. So the companies that are forward thinkers are already thinking ahead in terms of what that experience may look like and interaction with the consumers may look like, and how do they engage consumers and make their enterprises accessible to a broader community. So for that, we're also working with our clients in building these voice-enabled systems that understand different languages and accents well, using AI on the back end, and then bringing them to life through experiences.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.